All right, so here we are. Welcome to the ACE Show. As Zig Ziglar says, you can have everything in life you want if you'll help just enough other people get what they want. And that's what the ACE Show is really about. That's what the ACE community is about, helping professionals to succeed and thrive both personally and professionally. And this is really meant as a showcase to showcase experts or aces in their field and to leverage that knowledge to support this whole community that we have. And I get the privilege of introducing a really great friend of mine, very close friend of mine, and guest speaker today, or guest host, I guess, Nate Vogel. Hi, Nate. How you doing?
Hey, thanks for
Yeah,
having me. Thanks for having me, Chip.
I'm glad you're here. So Nate is the head of global enablement at Pigment. He previously headed enablement at companies like Tableau, Salesforce, Ong, where I followed him everywhere. Worked with him in so many companies. Bricks also. Fun fact, he racked up over 3 million miles of travel and is trained in 30 companies. That means he's been around and his ideas matter and mean something to teams and companies. I met him during my time. This is years ago. As you can tell by the beard, I've been around a while, but slinging a sample case and selling books door to door with the Southwestern Advantage Company, where Nate, you spent 20 years building character in young people since, gosh, building profitable teams, had one of the biggest teams in company history, broke many records at that 156 years that company's been around. And to break those many records, you got a lot that you're in. But of all the accolades, there's so many that I could heap upon Nate that are well deserved as a leader, as an executive. One of the things that I really admire about Nate, that I admire about you so much, is your ability to foster a winning culture with anybody that you're with. You have loyal people who just love being around you, and the culture that you build within organizations is really amazing. And so I'm so glad that you're here. And as I share with Nate, Nate's gonna be talking a lot. I really want you all on this to be prepared to get fresh perspectives, different ideas, be open and come with a willingness to learn and maybe even take action on ideas and best practices that Nate might share. Think about the ideas and strategies that are shared, how they can apply to your own brand, your own business, and your own role as a leader. Whether you're a leader with a big L, right, or a leader with a small L, look for ways that Nate's going to share because he's going to have gold. I promise you. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but it's going to be gold. And so really be open. And so, Nate, once again, thanks for being here.
You bet, of course, Chip. And anything I can do to help serve and share a little bit of lessons learned, mistakes made, especially in leadership. I think it's a craft that is hard to completely nail. And so I've been blessed to have such great mentors and been surely at great companies, and we'll talk all about that.
Yeah, for sure. And so, actually, with that, why don't you just tell us a little bit about how you got started as a leader? Like, can you recall, can you go back to that time where maybe even when you first realized that you had the makings of being a good leader?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. I'll slow down a little bit. I mean, listen, I know you know this. Data is going to be a big part of it, and I'm surely blessed of great parenting and saw good modeling and coaches. Was a big sports guy in high school. Specifically, played basketball and competitive basketball, and that's when I started getting into data. Even as kids, my twin brother and I, Jason, who also worked at Southwestern, we looking at football cards and baseball cards and studying the data on the cards in the back. I mean, I'm vividly remembering that. But in high school is when I started understanding how data can influence obviously good leadership moments. But I remember specifically, high school guard. My son, by the way, plays basketball and do a little bit of
You're
part-time
coaching
coaching.
right now, right?
Sure, yeah, surely in my head right now, but just studying data, right? I remember studying guards that I would, have to guard against. And so I knew that if they scored a lot but didn't pass a lot, more than likely if they were driving, that 9 out of 10 times, they would shoot, not pass, or vice versa. I'm actually trying to teach this to my son. He's a great passer, but he needs to be more, in the shooting
A
perspective.
little
But
more
if you know,
aggressive to take those open shots.
yeah, exactly. If you have the data, then you can kind of showcase, really good decisions, and that's, obviously ties a little bit into leadership. But listen, Southwestern gets a lot of credit. You and I both have that history, Southwestern Advantage. Surely being able to learn how to sell and run a business and work, 80 hours a week and 100% commission and what is it? We 10,000 calls or doors we talk to a summer. 95% of them, you may be sold better than me, shoot, but 96, 7% for you, but 95% say no. And so then you got to learn about leadership. And listen, there's some really good people that get a lot of credit. My student manager, Bob Chapman, Jeff Rogers, who's still mentor for a long time. And so you saw leadership early on and the influence.
Mm-hmm.
And then my student manager, and we'll maybe start talking about this down the road, is that this idea of leading by example and really understanding the power of modeling. And that has surely been a theme throughout not just Southwestern, but surely in tech and being head of enablement at Tableau, Salesforce, Gong, Databricks, and now Pigment. This idea of leadership and modeling the right behavior
Mm-hmm.
before asking for the right behavior is a really important key component. So
Yeah.
I've been blessed over the years and now close to, 30 or so plus being in leadership moments. And it's an opportunity to kind of think about it and reflect about it from a servant mentality too, that you get a chance to impact both good examples and bad examples. And maybe we'll double click into some of that too.
Yeah, so you actually I was thinking of the question that, what are some of the biggest lessons you learned while leading students, and how has that translated to you in your career? But I think you just answered it, but maybe you want to elaborate. You talked about leading by example and modeling. Can you see where your time, as a young professional helping others to succeed, where leading by example was useful, and how it translates to
Yeah,
now?
a few things. I mean, you can see some great books behind me, or I always say, and a good famous saying from Southwestern, great leaders are great readers. That could be some of the favorite books I have behind me. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, Drive by Daniel Pink, Carol Dweck's Growth Mindset. So, and not just books, it could be podcasts, it could be just always be learning. So I've kind of had this theme over the years about keep serving, keep learning. And that's in leadership too. And that's, not only from modeling, but you can see what great leaders do and can showcase and model that. And sometimes, in fact, I think the data says you learn from some of the bad behaviors or mistakes you've had 2 or 3x. And so there's all kinds of opportunities that you were able to do that. That's why I love coaching. Even, on my son's team. Also, another great honor I have is being not all of the companies that I've served, but also being here in Seattle, there's the University of Washington, which is, the largest university here in the state. They have a business school called Foster School of Business. And then you can actually get a minor in sales. So one of the 197 or so schools in the US that you can actually get a minor in sales. So I'm actually on the advisory board for that sales program. And so every couple months, I'll go into the classroom and try to share some of the lessons learned on leadership and data and try to teach these students some of the same philosophies, but just modeling and reinforcing and showcasing that leadership, I think makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I remember oftentimes, you have either just read a book, or you thought of a book, and you would routinely kind of just get that book for the whole team as a
Right.
way, like, I just read it here. Why don't you all read it? And it's just like, that's what makes it kind of sets, I think, some leaders apart, is when they're not only talking the talk, but they walk the talk, right? And so you are a real great example of walking the talk. I don't know how you do it though, with all the stuff that you have
Look
on
at
your
this.
plate.
It's a real example right here. I didn't know if you're gonna. So I've just ordered this book from my team here at Pigment, and I did the same at Databricks, and I don't get credit for this. This was a guy named Nick Lawrence, who's a great enablement leader. This is a enablement folks
The
out there.
Kirkpatrick,
This
yep.
Kirkpatrick model, 4 levels of training, evaluation. So in other words, how do you measure enablement? Just ordered all these for our team. So I'm a big fan of just, you get good book, good podcasts, share it, have others learn.
I think even
And
just that alone, just the fact that you care enough about the team to kind of give them that one little, it's not little, those little bits over time, touch points, say, hey, I care about you. Here's something that's going to help your development. One thing that
yeah.
you're so good at, is building people, allowing people to be their own, grow into their leadership. So you give a lot of space, right? And so when you're building like a world-class team, you can't be the leader all the time. You've got to trust people that they're going to get something done. And I think that's one thing, when it comes to, like I said, building a world-class team, I think you're really strong at that. I think that might be even good transition right now. It's like, when you think about go-to-market enablement, maybe we could touch on that. And then I would like to come back to this idea of how do you help people become their own leaders. because you work yourself out of a person. You lead yourself out of these leaders. They end up leaving you, right? And that's what you want. But we can talk more about that. But what's go-to-market enablement for those who don't know it? And maybe what does it focus on, and what is your mission with regards to enablement?
Yeah, I think it ties into leadership. I mean, in general, go-to-market enablement or sales enablement or partner enablement, but basically there's teams, especially in tech, but there's, teams built to actually help enable or help the sales team perform, either increase productivity, in other words, help them, hit target a little bit better, or overall develop leadership sales programs. So think new messaging, new product, new competitive intelligence. So there's teams that are assembled to help actually help companies, ultimately hit and exceed their targets. And so one of the reasons I love Southwestern was an absolutely great experience, and there's so many great people that do that. That's how I actually got and heard about Tableau at the time here in Seattle. Was a startup and really small, but it was about 400 or 500 people. And speaking of another great leader, Kelly Wright, I'll maybe get her on the show sometime.
Great idea.
And so Kelly was the first salesperson at Tableau and rose through the ranks as executive vice president. And I remember specifically because we had dinner with her and her husband, Jeff. And that was, ironically, it was that was my wife and I's first date away from my son, who I think was like 4 or 5 months old at the time. So that was a long time ago. But that was a night she told me about Tableau, and that, hey, you've got a sales background, you've got a training background, you got a leadership background. Why don't you come over and look into Tableau? And so obviously I interviewed and started joining, and that's the equivalent what enablement is. And so I started building out that team, and really that was a great, really fun 9 years. Built the enablement team from 3 to 80, and I thought that was a pretty
That's
large team.
fantastic.
You were on that team
I
partly.
joined about midway, about
Yeah.
25 into it, I think.
Yeah, and so over the years, and we went IPO and went public, and then of those 9 years, 2 were with Salesforce. And I thought that I thought we had a big team, but then Salesforce acquired us, and they had 300 enablement people. But we really learned how to do enablement at scale, because I think at the time Tableau was 4 or 5,000 people. Salesforce was 50, 60,000. So I was blessed over those couple of years, as you were, to like really learn how to do enablement and training at scale.
Yeah.
But that enablement function was correlated, because after 9 years wanted to go to Gong and get customer facing. If you're not familiar with Gong, it's a conversation intelligence tool that helps analyze conversations and get insights and data. You can hear data. By the way, Tableau, most people now know what Tableau is, a data visualization. So big fan of seeing the data, understanding the data, and making action from the data. Gong is conversation intelligence data.
Yeah.
Inspiring for a couple of years. I had the honor to run enablement and be customer facing. So get in front of customers and show what Gong looks like, and how do you actually measure enablement and the effectiveness. By the way, that's Kirkpatrick model is a good example or model to do that.
Good tool.
Databricks was amazing for a year and a half doing the enablement and kind of helping that team really understand the competency development. So, we're really working on business acumen and account planning and partner enablement. And, that's all about obviously the insights to the data, and making sure you can actually, store it, and, surely make sure that you can run AI. So I think Databricks has been the center of that. They call themselves Databricks, AI, data and AI company. And Pigment was appealing to me because it's a financial planning software. And so think about all the things currently that are happening right now with macroeconomic, political, all the tariffs. Pigment is a financial planning software, so it can actually help analyze and make decisions specifically around financial planning. And so it's been fun. Data's been a theme across obviously the whole space that I've even as a kid, obviously, but especially as you get into leadership and making sure that you can understand the data and make good sense of it. These are great tools and technologies that can help.
And so for you also, I know that you have used data a lot of times, especially in the enablement space, to when you're talking to senior leaders, right? Oftentimes is initiative working, and in enablement, sometimes it's hard to, until data came about, right? At least this really big, with Gong and Tableau, it was much harder to quantify an enablement role. And I know you've really pushed that. And I don't know if other companies really do that as much. And so I guess my question would be, are there any best practices that you can share for anyone a leader who's really trying to take their team to this next level of success. Maybe they have a team of 3, but they'd love to build it up to 25, 30, 40, 80 enablement members, and they want to scale. Or maybe it's modest and they just want to add two more people to support their team. But are there any best practices or tips that you might offer to someone who is looking to kind of expand their team and continue to kind of create a world-class team like you've done so many times?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things at top of mind that I think about. When we learned this at Southwestern, if you remember, we used to do the student manager creed, which if you hire someone, recruit someone, we used to have this 3x5 card. I'm sure you do it digitally now, but you say, okay, these are all the things that I'm going to commit to. And as a leader, you'd say, if I'm going to ask you to work 80 hours a week, I'm going to do 80 hours a week. If I'm going to ask you to do these things, then I'm going to model it. And we used to sign it. And I remember, and it doesn't mean we didn't nail that every time. And I'm sure there's things over the years I could have done better. But I think about that over the years where as much as you can best practice, to answer your question, model or make sure that you're doing everything you're asking your team to do as best as possible. So if you're, think about the data, the measurement framework where you're really trying to say, okay, I'm going to make sure I'm measuring my own activity and my own, whether you're gong calls or how many sales calls you're getting on or how many, leaders that you're meeting with, but just that modeling, I think it seems so simple. And you can study all the greatest athletes or the greatest musicians, and many of them they'll reflect and they'll reference people that came before them and they learned from some of the greats, and then that helped them even accomplish even more. So and you might have heard me say this to other podcasts, other meetings, where like most of my success, I mean, obviously family and the wife and son and all the things I'm blessed to have, but a lot of my success comes from my mentors, people that were before me. So Kelly's a great mentor. Shirley took me under her wing at Tableau. By the way, called out Jeff Rogers, 20 years being under his reign and leadership. By the way, when Kelly retired, another great leader came in, Dan Miller. I learned a lot from Dan and Adam Slipsky, who came from Amazon and taught a lot about the 6-page narratives and making sure you can articulate
Closed
your thoughts.
narratives.
And yeah, the 6-page narrative that Amazon has kind of been coined, but Adam brought that to Tableau, where you can make sure you can write in a written format with data, really good thinking around strategic initiatives and how those are going to succeed. And I could just keep going. And I've just been so blessed to have such great mentors. Dan Darcy gets a lot of credit. When Salesforce acquired us, he ran Enablement at the time, and he took me under his wing. And so I could just keep going and going and going. So maybe another best practice is get some great mentors, get some people around you that can help teach you and share your wisdom. I'm just thinking of other great people. Francois, I have to give a shout out to Francois. He was head of product at Tableau. He taught me so much stuff about, being product driven and making sure you're into, understanding the technology and the value proposition of the technology. So I surely have taken that to Databricks and Gong and Pigment. And so big best practice. I think the last
great
thing
names.
on that, maybe one other little thought was people say to me, what's your number one mistake? So here you go. Number one mistake of 30 years, 25 years, specifically enablement. I did too much enablement to rep, and I should have done enablement to leader and manager, then manager to rep. And again, we just talked about it. Let's say we're rolling out a new messaging and we do all this training. We pull all the people from the field and we train them specifically on saying these new words and these specific things that will represent your company in a better way. But if that manager comes along and one doesn't reinforce, or that leader doesn't reinforce, and worse, potentially not model the new behavior, then no matter how good our teams were, which I think we were very good, a lot of that enablement was wasted. And then, another best practice is it's easier to launch enablement. It's very hard to measure it. And so one of the things that, we've done lately is specifically work through leaders to make sure that they're either informed and they know exactly why we're doing it. They get all their questions answered. They can actually go practice in a safe place, the new messaging as an example.
Yep.
And then they can go reinforce that with their teams, model it. If it's not being implemented in their team, then also, make sure it's done. And then ultimately we measure it and we win together as a team, lose together as a team. And so all of these, again, just three kind of main thoughts came out of my mind. best practices. I'm sure I got a bunch more, but those are a
No,
few.
no, this is great. This is going to be a great snippet to post for sure. Lots of really good, easily, well, I don't know how easy, but implementable ideas that people can use, right? And because, I mean, some people would look at you and you just make it look so easy. You really do. You make it look so easy. And I know you have that great analogy of the duck, right? Where
Yeah,
you got, you make it look
right here,
so
dude.
easy. Tell them
By the way.
us a little bit about the duck, because
Yeah.
this is what people see when they see you. They see smooth, a duck smooth on water, but what's going on, really?
Yeah, and there's these great, images out there, and you surely go and see it, but it's something similar as, when you see a duck on the water, it looks so smooth, they're gliding in a beautiful way, but if you look closely, you see the legs kicking underneath, and yeah, exactly. I don't know if it looks like that or not, but it really looks similar to what you just said. But like, I've used this in so many things. I mean, again, as a leader, this has to be, you kind of have the duck mentality. Surely I try to do this as a parent and as a coach, where you just have, as best as you possibly can, have this like kind of calmness, because you've got the experience, you know the strategy, you potentially know the direction you're trying to go, but it doesn't mean you're working hard underneath to help, to make a lot of activity happen. So that's the duck mentality, and that's partly why I have a duck sitting on the back of my credenza here, and it's something I constantly just think of, and these are a lot of times great leaders. There's a calmness. Doesn't mean that you don't have intensity, and everyone has their different personalities around, when you get stressed, potentially there's certain ways, good or bad, of how you respond. But I think this calmness and this idea that I'm still going to work extremely hard and
Yep.
produce all the activity, but have this gliding approach. And listen, I think it's a lesson learned, mistake made. Surely early on at Southwestern, it wasn't fun. I wasn't fun to do business with. I don't think I enjoyed the sport, the craft of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can enjoy the sport, using a metaphor here of leadership, the craft, you enjoy the game, then you have a lot more success with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's another potential best practice or lesson learned around, that's why I keep saying, keep serving, keep learning, because it's a constant. And when you have that mentality, a lot of times you enjoy the moments, you have fun. We doesn't mean you sometimes enjoy the moments of struggle
Mm-hmm.
too, because you know how hard it is, or you potentially know that, when it has success to it, like enabling managers and leaders first
Yeah.
and seeing the power of that. You just go, wow, that makes a big difference. I'll tell an example. Dan Miller, who was the CRO of Tableau at the time, I remember part of sales kickoff, we decided, hey, we're going to bring all the frontline leaders in first. We had about 450 leaders in the room. And before we started, I was so blessed and honored to MC a lot of this with Dan. And Dan and I looked in the audience, and Dan looked over to me and said, hey, this room is going to produce $2 billion in revenue this year. Right. And it's just that it helped me think big, but also he understood the power of leadership and understanding that this is the room that's going to obviously help the whole company, contributes to the success. But he understood the leadership moments like that. And I remember thinking like this is a, really good example of like kind of enjoying the moment, enjoying the sport. And we saw that, and then kudos to Dan and his leadership team. We had a lot of success, and then obviously Salesforce acquired us, and had
Yes.
a bunch after that too.
Well, you mentioned calm. Dan is a good example of that too, right? He seemed to be. He's high energy, but he was calm. I didn't
Oh,
really. I
sorry.
mean, he always was. I didn't really see him sweat. He was always, I'm sure behind the scenes maybe that's happening, but
Yeah,
I didn't see that. And I
we
think that's
definitely.
how.
I would go on record. We definitely saw. Some of us saw it. We
So,
loved the intensity. We loved it. And there was times when he was so. And it was a beautiful thing about Dan. It was so authentic. But the intensity is okay. I think there was times when he expected excellence, and we talked to example about this with account planning, where we introduced account planning, and he expected excellence, and had no problem sharing with expectations. This is what I expect, and if
mhm.
we're not meeting that, and I'd love that. But he had this great leadership calmness, knowing like, hey, I know where we think this team should
And I
go, and
saw a lot of that. I didn't
love
quite
that
get
for us.
to view the others as much. And
Yeah.
really, this leads to this next idea, right? We talk about cultivating a winning culture. And I love that example of Dan just basically telling the group, this group is going to be responsible for generating 2 billion in revenue. And I mean, I can imagine the group, I wasn't there at the time, but I can imagine the group getting buying in a little bit more to that message. And so for me, I wonder, I'd be interested, why is it so important to cultivate like a winning culture? Why is that such an important piece to developing successful teams? And how do you do it? What does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah, I have a few thoughts, and then go back to like even high school playing sports, and like was blessed to be on some really strong teams, state championship type teams. And there's a difference between being on teams and then having that like world's best, or you look back and one of the most sought after or renowned teams. And surely think when we look back at, people think about Tableau and that run, and surely think about what Tableau did at the time and over the years. And then surely I think Enablement gets, part success to that. And very thankful of that, of the team, and many of them, including you and many others, I'm very still close with. And now the cool part about this team is now they're all over. I think you're going to have Michael Waddell next week
Yeah,
on
yeah, yeah.
here. Like he was part of that Tableau Great Enablement team. And so they're now in all these different companies. And so that's really fun too. You think about all the things that we try to teach around data, around modeling, around working through leaders, making sure, by the way, partners are enabled. Partners are enabled. I'm a big fan, especially in tech. There's a lot of partners out there that represent your product. And so I'm a big fan of always, whatever you do internally, make sure you're doing with your partners. But anyways, these people are kind of dispersed now in all these different technologies across the globe. And it's really fun to kind of look back and say, I made a little bit of an impact.
Yeah.
Go back to a couple of specifics. So one, I do think the leadership and modeling is such an important example. I'll tell you a quick story. I remember having a leader share with me that, hey, I had some things to work on, and go read this book. So, I'm trying to take notes and always try to be coachable. So I probably 3 months later or whatever, it took me a while to get to it. I finally read it. And I remember like reading the book and reading every chapter thinking, oh, I'm sure this is exactly what the leader that, was giving me some feedback on meant. And so I remember going back to the leader saying, hey, just so you know, I read that book. It was really helpful. I remember chapter 3 specifically, there was a call out, and I just wanted to ask, was this what you meant by your feedback? And this leader said, oh, I actually didn't read the book, but I really thought it would be something that would be good for you because other leaders have read it. I've heard good things about it. And I remember leaving that meeting just like, wow, I'm really disappointed, because although the intent was in the right place to try to give me some help, the power of modeling and just making sure that you're always, doing the idea that, hey, I was disappointed, obviously,
Yeah.
and more importantly, I actually know the context now, right, of exactly what was meant to be said, because I actually thought I nailed it on chapter 3. Maybe I nailed it. So modeling, and that creates a winning culture.
Mm-hmm.
That creates a championship team. And you can study, for me, again, this is my sport, but I love basketball as my sport, but like, you see some of the greatest winning teams, and many of them, these are some of the ingredients around. Some of the best players are the ones that are at practice before the game. They're after the game, and all the examples of that. A lot of times the coaches model the right behavior. In fact, really proud this last season, myself and the other coach Josh, who's amazing, by the way, I learned so much. We were trying to teach, especially 7th grade and 8th grade boys, what we want them to do. And a lot of times it was easier to just model it.
Uh-huh.
I'll never forget trying to tell those kids, like, hey, when the ball's on the ground, you've got to get on that ground and jump on the ball, and don't wait for the team to come over and kind of have a jump ball, but you can get on the ground so fast and tip it up to your teammate, you can keep going. And I saw blank stares in these kids' eyes. And so I said, hey, roll me a ball. And I jumped on the ground and I threw it. And these, at my age, you shouldn't be doing that. But modeling. In fact, if there's one big leadership takeaway, as best as you possibly can, do that. And by the way, if you make mistakes or if you didn't model the way you should, then also I think another great ingredient to winning teams, championship teams, great culture within those teams is admitting that you had a mistake. This is maybe point number two.
Yeah.
Speaking of Dan, I was one of the things I think he always appreciated about my leadership style. If for some reason there was a mistake or there was something that wasn't executed, and I try to still do this, I'll say, hey, that's on my leadership.
Yes.
I remember Dan saying, well, is it on your leadership or was it just someone on your team that didn't do it? I said, doesn't matter. That's on my leadership.
Yeah.
And I never try to call out a specific person. And by the way, when they had success, it's on my leadership too.
That's right.
But I think a lot of times winning teams, sometimes if you do have a setback, which they all do, you also have to kind of say, hey, no, that's on my leadership. So that, again, kind of another reflection. And maybe the last thing, and I've touched about it earlier, I have not found any other way, and I'm sure there is, but to have success except through service. And this, and you started this podcast off with a great Zig Ziglar quote, and I truly mean that. You have to help enough people have success, and you'll have your own success. And there's all these different versions of service mentality and servant leadership, but I found that that's probably been my secret sauce. Has been just try to help and serve. Speaking of enablement, when I present, no matter what company I'm at, my client, my customer is the internal teams and the partner team, but the internal team. And I say to them all the time, hey, you are our customer. You're my customer. We serve you. How can we help you? And it just found that to be probably the most important ingredient for a winning team.
Yeah.
And when everyone has a servant mentality and everyone tries to make sure we're helping other people, then in turn, you will have your own success. True story, get my son to come validate this. He knows this. Every day at school, I say to him, help someone. Extend your reach. Vision is not just for the basketball court. It's for life.
Yeah.
Help people. There's kids that maybe don't have the friends that you have. Maybe there's some kids that are whether it's being bullied or other things. Leadership is an opportunity no matter what age. So one, model it. And then two, and I say to them all the time, who have you helped? Make sure you help some people today. And so it's not just a work thing, but it's something that, I'm trying to obviously instill in my own son.
That's great. I mean, I brought this up earlier, but I think another great example of that is how you say you've seen a lot of the people that you've had a chance to touch their lives as a leader move into leadership roles. I think you've never been you've never been worried about, I've got to keep this person with me. If they grow to a point where they can move on and be, you welcome that and you encourage that, right? And so you encourage people to be leaders. And I don't know if you have a philosophy that you have around that you'd love to talk more about, but I think that is an essence of a servant leader.
Yeah, a couple of things that made real-time thought. I mean, I've always said the metaphor analogy is you can put sand. This works well if you're on a beach, by the way, but we'll play with this. But if you put sand in your hand and you can hold it, you hold it for your life. But as soon as you start gripping that sand and holding on tighter and tighter, it slips through, right? So I try to think of that from a leadership standpoint. And this, I've talked about this at times where if someone says, hey, I might have a better opportunity or I might think about going somewhere else or not, even they might not bring it up and I'll bring it up. In fact, a lot of times people say to me all the time, Nate, you talk to me more about when I'm going to leave this company and stay. But what I'm trying to do is teach competencies. Go back to the measurement framework for enablement. The top hardest thing to do is actually measure training effectiveness. It's one of literally the hardest things to do. And McKinsey Consulting comes out and says 70% of all large transformational strategic initiatives that companies launch fail. And so I'm trying to consistently teach competencies and principles that are timeless, that whatever company you're at, you can take those frameworks, those data-driven approaches and apply them. And so I'm always kind of, again, trying to hold the sand loosely a little bit with the people that I serve, because whether it's at that company or companies that they move forward, I'm really proud not only they are at these great companies, but many of them are applying the same principles, the frameworks, the leaders, reading and being educated, the work through managers, make sure you're thinking about partners. And so all of that is, I kind of look back on my career and really fond thoughts and things come to my head around that I'm really proud of not only teaching them to be successful in the company that they're at at that moment, but there are things that they take with them and comply it. And, and I've referenced many times too, the mentors that I have had, I feel like I'm, paying it forward. And then
Hmm.
obviously even more importantly, down to your family and your friends and trying to one model it
Yep.
and then two, try to have influence, whether it's a coach or your own kids, trying to have a little bit of impact there. And every time, listen, by say, hey, did you help someone today? 9 out of 10 times he's no, or but a few times he has.
Yeah.
As a parent, there's not a more beautiful moment when he'll tell a story about an extension. And one of them was about riding a bus, and he had to sit with a kid that they have seating assignments, but this got kind of messed up, and he had to actually sitting by a kid that didn't have a lot of friends, and he kind of took him in, and that actually helped influence some other kids because they saw him talking to him. Hey, it's literally emotional kind of things to think about as a
Yeah.
parent. Again, I'm going to keep saying it to him, and more importantly, try to model it as much as I possibly can, and hopefully he's watching.
Certainly, this is not only for your business life, but leadership goes all around, right? I mean, it applies to your family, your friends, your relationships that you have. And I just know that I can't quantify the amount of, for lack of a better word, stuff I've learned from you. And sometimes I don't know if that's my idea or if it's something I learned from you, but this is the idea, right? I still haven't stopped learning from you. And I believe that's the same with you and mentors. I don't think leadership really ends for you, does it? Because I don't know how you do it. I've said this before, but I don't know how you do it. You have so many people continuing to reach out. How do you do your work, your family, still stay in touch with people? I mean, we talk just about every other day, at least, right? It seems like. And I'm not the only one that you have this relationship with, that you've led, that you still like you care for and you love and you show them support. I mean, how do you do it?
Yeah, should be very sweet. I mean, thank you. Well, obviously, for all the listeners out there, we're good friends. You can see it. We've been blessed for both sides. I would say the same thing about you too, by the way. I mean, I try to be smart about the time. Some of it is, some people, in the car, use certain music or listen to podcasts, which I try to do periodically. But a lot of times I use that, especially if I'm by myself going back and forth to the city or practices or whatever. I just try to use my phone. And I think it does surprise people how many times I just call people kind of randomly and check in and say hi and see how they're doing and make sure they know I can continue to serve. Speaking of Salesforce, and sometimes this happens, you'll have layoffs or other things. And, I'm really proud. I think sometimes the first call I get will be, people asking for help. Can I write their recommendation? Do I know any companies that are hiring? I just did this a few weeks ago. So it's nice where I can have that relationship still keep going and try to help and serve. So the timing wise, as far as serving, I think, and just periodically kind of picking up the phone or making sure you can have time to meet with people that, you want to continue to influence, even if they're potentially not working with you every single day. Speaking of Salesforce, and sometimes this happens, they had a few layoffs recently, and one of the people that I worked with forever, obviously reached out and see if she could get some help. And so I'm one of the first people call, right? If they're trying to either want, whether it's layoffs or just career development or potentially deciding to do something else. A lot of times I'll just sync with them or they'll call me and just ask for some advice. So just did that recently. So it's so fun to be able to continue to serve and mentor well beyond even working day to day. And so that also feels really good. I've said to people multiple times, what's, one of my greatest assets, besides maybe my clothes, my fashion. I'm blessed to have some good fashion. And
I
Shirley,
didn't
by the
even
way,
bring that up. That should have been one of the
that's
first
right.
things I introduced about you.
Come
Was
on,
the
dude.
I'm so
Yeah.
sorry I failed there.
Someone said, why'd you join Pigment? I said, well, they're located in Paris. So at least you go. No, Pigment's an amazing company, but Paris was up in the top, 10 up my fashion game. Besides fashion, that was a joke, by the way. Well, not a joke, but you know what I mean. But this is my network. I've just been so blessed, and I think the older you get, I think you more and more you respect it and appreciate it. But that is something I'm really proud of, and try to do these things as much as I possibly can to try to continue to reach out and serve. And in fact, a few times I've put my cell phone on LinkedIn, and people are just like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that." I'm like, "Why?" Like, what if you get sold to or prospected into? Okay, maybe I'll learn from them trying to sell me as an enablement, trainer. But more importantly, I'm just here to help. I'm here
Yeah.
to help serve, no matter what the situation is.
Well, Nate, I think this is great. I'm going to quote you, something you've said for years, and I just want to let you know that you do a good thing. You really do, Nate. You are not only a dear friend, one of the best I've ever had, but you are a leader extraordinaire, and you are an amazing, amazing man. And so I'm just lucky to have the chance to interview you on the Ace Show. And so if someone wants to reach out to you, you've now said that on LinkedIn, you may still have it. I don't know. Your phone number is available. How can people reach out to you? Would it be through LinkedIn, or what's the best way for some if they have questions or they want to connect?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for your sweet comments. Again. Really appreciate that. And I have found too, I do think teaching philosophies around we do a good thing that was from Southwestern and promoting education. Surely there's the keep learning, keep serving is something I think is easy for people to remember and keep being influenced. But yeah, LinkedIn's right now the best way to reach out. I still get comments all the time like, Nate, where's all the podcasts and content you've produced? And I am working on kind of some site where folks can get access to that sometime down the road. But for now, just LinkedIn, shoot me a note.
Okay.
I'm pretty good about responding back.
Yeah,
And, surely here to help.
that's awesome. Thank you so much, Nate. So this was a great call. Well, the Ace Show. We bring the experts. We bring the heat. So stay tuned for the next Ace Show, where we're going to have Michael Wydell, who's the head of sales enablement at Qualified. He's going to share his thoughts on the power of discovery and of being curious as a leader, and really looking for the awe moment in your relationships and your interactions with people. And I hope that you have a wonderful week, and may you ace your life.